July 14, 1518. Strasbourg. A woman named Frau Trophia steps out of her house and starts dancing in the middle of the street. There's no music. No celebration. No reason. She just dances. Her husband begs her to stop. Neighbors gather and stare. But she keeps going. 4 hours. Then days. Her feet bleed. She collapses from exhaustion. And when she wakes up, she dances again. Within a week, 30 people have joined her. Within a month, 400 people are dancing in the streets, unable to stop. Some dance until their hearts give out. Some collapse from strokes. Some simply drop dead from exhaustion. This is the dancing plague of 1518, one of the strangest and most disturbing events in European history. And to this day, nobody knows for certain what caused it. Strasbourg in 1518 was not a happy place. The city sat in Alsace, part of the Holy Roman Empire, in what's now eastern France. For years, the people had endured one disaster after another. Crop failures. Famine. Disease. In the 3 years before the plague, harvests failed repeatedly. People starved. Malnutrition weakened everyone. Smallpox and syphilis spread through the crowded streets. The summer of 1518 was brutally hot, making everything worse. People were desperate, exhausted, and terrified. Many believed the world was ending. Strange omens appeared in the sky. A comet in 1492 had been interpreted as a sign of apocalypse. Floods and extreme weather convinced people that God was angry. This was the world Frau Trophia lived in when she stepped into the street and began to dance. The historical record is clear on what happened, even if the why remains a mystery. Multiple sources from the time document the outbreak. Physician notes, cathedral sermons, local chronicles, and city council records all confirm it. On July 14, Frau Trophia danced alone. By the third day, her feet were bloody and swollen, but she couldn't stop. Crowds gathered to watch. Some thought she was possessed by demons. Others believed she had been blessed or cursed by Saint Vitus, a Catholic saint associated with dancing and epilepsy. Medieval Europeans believed Saint Vitus could inflict a dancing curse on sinners. If you angered the saint, you would be forced to dance until he forgave you or until you died. By the end of the first week, over 30 people were dancing alongside Frau Trophia. They danced in the streets, in the town square, anywhere they could find space. They didn't stop to eat. They barely stopped to sleep. Witnesses described the dancers as being in a trance, their movements frantic and uncontrollable. Some danced with joy on their faces. Others looked terrified, as if trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. The Strasbourg City Council was alarmed. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a festival or a celebration. People were getting hurt. Some were dying. The council called in local physicians to figure out what was happening. The doctors examined the dancers and came to a conclusion that, in hindsight, seems insane. They diagnosed the dancing as a fever. And like any fever, they reasoned, the cure was to let it burn itself out. The dancers needed to sweat it out of their systems. So the doctors prescribed more dancing. The city council followed their advice. They cleared spaces for the dancers. They hired professional musicians to play music day and night, thinking it would help the dancers find a rhythm and eventually tire themselves out. They even brought in professional dancers to help guide the afflicted and keep them upright when they stumbled. It backfired spectacularly. The music and the official permission to dance only made things worse. Healthy people joined in either out of curiosity, fear of the curse, or genuine belief that dancing would protect them from Saint Vitus's wrath. The plague spread. By mid-August, chroniclers reported that up to 400 people were dancing uncontrollably in Strasbourg streets and public halls. The number might be exaggerated. Some historians think the real figure was closer to 100 or 200. But even if the lower estimate is correct, that's still a staggering number of people seized by the same compulsion. And people were dying. Historical sources disagree on the death toll. Some claim that as many as 15 people a day were dying from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. Others argue that the death toll was lower, or that deaths weren't systematically recorded. What's certain is that people did die. The city's chroniclers mention deaths. Physicians wrote about treating dancers who collapsed and never got up. The dancing plague wasn't just strange. It was lethal. Faced with failure, the Strasbourg City Council reversed course. In early August, they banned public dancing. They forbade musicians from playing in the streets. They shut down the guild halls where dancers had been gathering. But the dancing didn't stop immediately. The afflicted couldn't help themselves. They danced in secret. They danced in their homes. They danced wherever they could. The council then turned to religion. If this was a curse from Saint Vitus, then perhaps appeasing the saint would end it. The council organized pilgrimages to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus in the nearby town of Saverne, in the Vosges Mountains. Dancers were loaded onto wagons and taken to the shrine, where they prayed, made offerings, and received blessings. Some were given small crosses and red shoes that had been consecrated with holy oil and sprinkled with holy water in Saint Vitus's name. The idea was that wearing these blessed items would break the curse. Slowly, the plague began to fade. By September 1518, 2 months after it started, the dancing had stopped. The streets of Strasbourg returned to normal. The survivors went back to their lives, though many were left with lasting injuries and trauma. So what actually caused the dancing plague of 1518? Historians and scientists have debated this for centuries, and there's still no definitive answer. The most popular early theory was ergot poisoning. Ergot is a toxic fungus that grows on damp rye, a grain commonly used to make bread in medieval Europe. When consumed, ergot can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and spasms, a condition known as St. Anthony's fire. On the surface, this seems like a plausible explanation. The dancers were twitching and moving uncontrollably. Ergot can cause that. But there's a problem. Ergot poisoning also causes severe constriction of blood vessels, leading to gangrene, intense pain, and an inability to move. Victims of ergot poisoning don't dance for days. They can barely walk. Historian John Waller, who has studied the plague extensively, debunked the ergot theory in his book A Time to Dance, A Time to Die. The symptoms don't match. Ergot poisoning doesn't explain why people danced for weeks or why the outbreak spread so rapidly. Another theory is that the dancers were part of a religious cult or sect, using the dancing as a form of protest or ritual. Strasbourg in 1518 was experiencing religious tension. Martin Luther had challenged Catholic doctrine the year before, in 1517, sparking the Protestant Reformation. Some historians suggest the dancers might have been expressing dissent or engaging in ecstatic religious experiences. But there's no evidence that the dancers were organized or that they shared a common religious agenda. The sources describe them as ordinary citizens, not members of a secret society. The most widely accepted explanation today is mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is a psychological phenomenon where groups of people develop physical symptoms in response to extreme stress, even though there's no underlying physical cause. The symptoms are real. The people aren't faking it. But the illness originates in the mind, not the body. And it spreads through social contagion. When one person exhibits symptoms, others around them, especially if they're already stressed or suggestible, begin to exhibit the same symptoms. In Strasbourg in 1518, the conditions were perfect for mass hysteria. The population was traumatized by years of famine, disease, and fear. They were physically weakened and emotionally drained. They believed deeply in the curse of Saint Vitus. When Frau Trophia started dancing, people interpreted it through the lens of that belief. She had been cursed. And if she had been cursed, maybe they could be cursed too. Watching her dance triggered a psychological response in others. The belief that they were cursed became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their bodies responded to the belief by dancing, even though there was no physical compulsion forcing them to do so. This theory explains several things the others don't. It explains why the dancing spread so quickly and why it affected so many people. It explains why the dancing stopped after religious intervention, not medical treatment. It explains why the symptoms varied, some dancers appearing joyful, others terrified, because the psychological triggers and responses varied from person to person. And it explains why the dancing plague of 1518 wasn't unique. Similar outbreaks of dancing mania occurred throughout medieval Europe, especially during times of extreme stress. In 1374, a dancing plague spread along the Rhine River, affecting multiple towns. In earlier centuries, smaller outbreaks were recorded in Germany and Switzerland. The 1518 event in Strasbourg was just the most famous and best documented. Modern psychology supports the mass hysteria theory. Research on emotional contagion shows that people unconsciously mimic the emotions and behaviors of those around them. In high-stress situations, this mimicry can escalate into collective action. Neuroscience research on mirror neurons suggests that humans are wired to copy the actions of others, creating a neural basis for imitative behavior. When stress runs high and people are in close proximity, behaviors can spread like wildfire. The dancing plague wasn't supernatural. It was psychological. But that doesn't make it any less real or any less tragic. The story of the dancing plague of 1518 reminds us how powerful the mind can be, especially under extreme conditions. The dancers of Strasbourg weren't possessed by demons. They weren't poisoned by ergot. They were human beings pushed beyond their limits by famine, disease, fear, and a culture that taught them to expect divine punishment. Their dancing was a physical manifestation of collective trauma, shaped by the beliefs and expectations of their time. Today, Strasbourg is a modern city, home to the European Parliament and a thriving cultural scene. But in 1518, for 2 months, it was the site of one of history's strangest and most disturbing epidemics. 400 people, maybe more, danced until they collapsed. Some danced until they died. And when it finally ended, the survivors were left to make sense of what had happened, just as we still are, over 500 years later. The dancing plague of 1518 stands as a testament to the strange and unpredictable ways the human mind can respond to unbearable stress. It's a reminder that even without visible enemies, fear and belief can drive people to extraordinary and tragic extremes. And it's a story that, for all its strangeness, reveals something deeply human about how we cope when the world becomes too much to bear.